And welcome back to the SEAL Report for this week. As you can see, KWWL political analyst Dr. Chris Larimer, professor of political science at the University of Northern Iowa, on the screen right now via Zoom. So, Chris, we had a really interesting primary election night earlier this week with a record turnout. Kind of give me your overall, reaction to the outcome.
Well, the overall, I would say a couple of things. One, most of the races went as expected in the sense that the candidates who were ahead in fundraising, who were leading in endorsements, won their races. So you think about Teresa Greenfield for the U.S. Senate race, Ashley Hinson in the 1st District, Marionette Miller-Meeks in the 2nd District, David Young in the 3rd District. Those candidates who had competition but were out fundraising and had more endorsements kind of ran away with their elections, and that's what we would expect from political science research. The other, another point though to take away is obviously the upset of an incumbent congressman, in that case in Steve King in the 4th Congressional District. That Randy Feenstra was able to pull off that victory is a big deal, and it received considerable national attention on election night and in the days since. He had out fundraised Congressman King, but there was still a question of whether or not he could actually mobilize enough Republican supporters against King and to pull them into Senator Feenstra's camp, and he was able to do that. And then the third point is, just as you said, the record turnout, over 520,000 votes cast in the primary, about a 24% turnout. So just the record turnout, and then the nature, the way the races unfolded.
It was really something. I mean, Steve King, I'd never really seen anything like that, where his own party kind of shunned him in favor of State Senator Feenstra. That was kind of a shocking thing, but I don't think people were really surprised to see him go down the way he did, because his words eventually caught up to him.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point about the party elites. I mean, if you think of voters taking their cues from party elites, not only was Senator Feenstra raising a lot of money, but as you said, the leaders in Congress and elsewhere were saying that they were against King, or that King had needed to step aside. And I think that maybe reassured some Republican voters that it was okay to vote against their own incumbent.
When we talk about the Finkenauer-Hinson race coming up in November, here we have two females going head-to-head here. One's a former news anchor. She is currently a state representative. The other, a former state representative, now the sitting congresswoman from Iowa. A very interesting race. At this point, though, who has the advantage, do you think?
Well, when you're talking about congressional races, I think you typically default to the incumbent, in the sense that, incumbent members of Congress tend to be reelected at an extraordinarily high rate, on average over 90%. On the other hand, this is Congresswoman Finkenauer's first reelection bid, which tends to be the most difficult for an incumbent. This is a district that went for Trump by about 3.5 percentage points in 2016. And even though Democrats outnumber Republicans by about 6 percentage points in the district, this is also the district with the highest proportion of voters who are registered as no party. And so that adds an element of unpredictability to the race. And so, we've seen the last few election cycles where this particular race for Congress has been ranked among the top 10 most competitive in the country. And I would expect this to be very competitive in November as well.
Yeah, the whole nation will be watching that 1st congressional district. And of course, the U.S. Senate race, that is one of the top 3 or 4 in the nation this year, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And as you continue to see polling showing that former Vice President Biden is leading Donald Trump in several polls, there's a question about how many seats do the Democrats need to pick up to retake the U.S. Senate? Is it 3? Is it 4? Is it just 3? If they would win the White House, then they have the tie-breaking vote with the new vice president being the tie-breaking vote in the U.S. Senate. So more and more, it's been interesting to watch this Senate race, because as I said on election night, this is something that started off as likely Republican, and it keeps moving to being ranked as more competitive as we move on, because we've seen Senator Ernst's polling numbers drop over the last year. We've seen a shift in party registration as more voters are registered Democrat, and then a year ago, several thousand more. They picked up about a percentage point or 2 of voters. And so there's a real question about how vulnerable Senator Ernst really is. And then again, she shares party affiliation with a president who is considered somewhat controversial right now. His approval ratings have, they had maybe early on in the year been moving up, but they've started to move back down. And so I would expect this, as you said, to be one of those handful of races that most people are watching for the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, it's going to be a really expensive race, too. Let's talk about the 2nd District really quickly here in the last minute, Chris. Miller Meeks and Rita Hart. It's going to be an interesting battle there. The legislators going head-to-head. What do you think of that race?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's going to be competitive. Normally, this would be a district is if you had a Democratic incumbent like Congressman Loebsack, you would expect that he would have an advantage, that this would be a seat that would lean Democratic. But when you have an open seat like this, that instantly increases the level of competition within the district. So even though this is a district where you could argue that in terms of party registration, it's the most Democratic district in the state of the 4 congressional districts, because it's an open seat means that it's going to be a very competitive race. And as you said, with someone like Mariannette Miller Meeks, who has run in the district in the past, she already has name recognition. She has elected office experience, and going up against someone like Rita Hart, that's going to be a very competitive race, and again, a very expensive race. If you look at even the fundraising numbers coming out of the 1st congressional district, where both candidates are close to $2 million or $3 million, you're going to see a multi-million-dollar race in the 2nd congressional district as well.
And unfortunately, we are out of time for this week's program. Thanks to our guests, Dell and John Marion of ICU, the Inclusive Cultural University, and of course, Dr. Chris Larimer, KWWL political analyst from the University of Northern Iowa. And thanks to all of you, as this very important discussion underway across the country must continue in an effort to bring about real change and real justice, fairness, inclusion, and equality all across the United States. Please do your part to make this change happen. We'll see you right here next week on the Steele Report. Thanks for watching.